On stage, he looked invincible. The lights were blinding, the crowd was roaring, and Freddie Mercury was doing what he did better than almost anyone who had ever lived, turning thousands of strangers into one single heartbeat. From the outside, the show was perfect, his voice was soaring, his body was moving with that electrifying confidence, and every note hit like a promise that Freddie Mercury was unstoppable. But that wasn't the truth. Because what nobody in the audience knew, what the cameras didn't catch and the spotlights couldn't reveal, was that just minutes before the show, Freddie Mercury had collapsed on the floor of his own dressing room. The year was late 1980s. The shows were bigger, the schedule was harder, and Freddie's body was beginning to betray him in ways he wasn't ready to admit, not to the world, not to the fans, and definitely not to himself. Backstage, before the show, he had been shaking. Not from nerves. Freddie wasn't afraid of crowds anymore, the stage was the only place left where he still felt in control. No, this shaking was something deeper. Something that came from the inside out. A cold, relentless tremor that no amount of makeup or bravado could hide. He'd laughed it off at first. Told the makeup artist he just needed a drink. Told the wardrobe assistant he'd barely slept. Told himself it was exhaustion, stress, nothing serious. But then his vision blurred. His knees gave way. The dressing room floor rushed up to meet him. When they found him, he was pale. Sweat beading across his forehead. Breath shallow. Hands gripping his chest like he was fighting something only he could feel. The crew panicked. The doctor was called. The band was told. For a brief, terrifying moment, the question no one ever imagined asking suddenly became a very real possibility. Do we cancel the show? The venue was packed. The crowd was already chanting. Thousands of people had come to see him. Not just the band. Not just the music. Him. And Freddie, lying on the dressing room floor, struggling to catch his breath, knew it. He also knew something else. If he admitted he couldn't perform. If he let them cancel. If he let his body win tonight. Then whatever was happening inside him wouldn't just be an illness. It would become his identity. So when Brian, Roger and John were finally allowed into the room, when they saw him slumped on the small sofa, a towel around his shoulders, a doctor murmuring about overexertion and needing rest, they expected Freddie to say the one thing that made sense. I can't go on. Instead, Freddie Mercury looked up at the men who had built a life, a band, and an empire with him, and with a trembling voice, he said. Don't cancel. Please. Don't you dare cancel because of me. What followed in that small backstage room was one of the most intimate, heartbreaking, and revealing moments of Freddie's life. A moment when the mask slipped. When the performer became a man. When the band had to decide whether to protect their friend's life. Or his pride. This is the story of that night. The night Freddie Mercury collapsed backstage, and begged Queen not to cancel the show. The dressing room was too bright. Too white. Too unforgiving. Freddie squinted against the glare of the mirror lights as another layer of foundation was brushed over his skin. The makeup artist joked softly about stage sweat, cameras, and angles. Freddie chuckled along, but his eyes were unfocused, not quite locking onto his own reflection. You look tired, darling, the makeup artist said, dabbing gently under his eyes. I am tired, Freddie murmured, his voice softer than usual. But they don't pay to see tired. He flashed a quick smile, that full, dazzling grin that could light up entire arenas, but the muscles around his eyes didn't join in. The room was buzzing with noise, distant thumps of the crowd, stagehands shouting cues, the muffled bass of the opening support act finishing their last song. A runner stuck their head through the door for the third time. 20 minutes, Mr. Mercury. Tell them not to start without me, Freddie said, flicking his wrist in a dismissive gesture. But when the door shut again, he exhaled slowly. His heart was pounding too hard. Not the usual pre-show adrenaline. Something erratic. Skittering. Off. He rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the heaviness that had settled into his bones the past few months. The headaches. The strange fevers. The bone-deep fatigue that sleep never seemed to fix. He blamed the tours. He blamed the travel. He blamed the late nights. He blamed everything except the one possibility he refused to name. Freddie. Mary's voice echoed from the doorway. He turned his head, and there she was, familiar, constant, the one piece of his life that remained grounded no matter how high the world lifted him. She stepped into the room with a small smile, holding a scarf he'd forgotten in the car. "You left this," she said, draping it around his shoulders like a ritual. "Can't go on stage indecent, can I?" he joked. But his voice didn't have its usual bite. Mary studied him. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, love." He said it too quickly. She moved closer, her eyes scanning his face. "You're pale." "It's the makeup." "It's not the makeup." There was a brief beat of silence. He looked away. "It's just the usual. Long tours. No rest. Too many idiots wanting a piece of me. You know how it is." "Yes," she said softly. "I also know when you're lying." He didn't respond. The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. The edges of his vision blurred slightly as he tried to focus on her face. His chest tightened, not just emotionally this time, but physically, a squeezing pressure that made each breath feel like it had to fight its way in. "Freddie." Mary stepped forward, alarm in her eyes now. "You don't look." Her voice turned distant. The buzzing in his ears rose. The floor shifted beneath him, tilting like a stage in an earthquake. He tried to stand, to joke, to dismiss it with some line, "I'm not going anywhere, darling, unless it's to the bar," but his legs didn't listen. The world tilted. The lights exploded into white. And then nothing. A soft thud. The makeup brush clattered to the floor. Mary gasped. Someone shouted his name. "Freddie." He woke to the sound of voices. Muffled at first. Underwater. Distant. "Not sure he can go on. We have to tell the promoter. The arena's full, what are we supposed to?" A cold cloth pressed against his forehead. His body felt wrong, heavy, as if gravity had doubled. He groaned, eyes fluttering open. The ceiling stared back at him, ugly, sterile, too bright. He was lying on the sofa. Someone had semi-reclined him. A towel was draped around his shoulders. "Freddie." Mary's voice. Closer this time. Softer. Frightened. He turned his head. Her face swam into view, red-rimmed eyes, worry etched into every line. "Did I fall?" he asked, his throat dry. She nodded. "You collapsed." Dramatic, even unconscious, he tried to joke, but his voice cracked, and the attempt fell flat. Another figure leaned into view. A man in a suit, stethoscope around his neck, professional concern etched into his features. "Mr. Mercury, I'm the tour doctor," he said. "You fainted. Your heart rate was irregular, your blood pressure's low. You need rest." "Rest?" Freddie repeated, as if it were a foreign word. "There's a show." The doctor glanced toward the closed door, where the faint sound of the crowd rumbled like distant thunder. "You shouldn't perform tonight," he said plainly. "It wouldn't be safe." Freddie blinked slowly. "Cancel the show." The phrase hit him harder than the fall. Outside, they were chanting his name. Inside, his body had just told him, with brutal clarity. Enough. The doctor's words didn't just hang in the room, they split it. "You shouldn't perform tonight." Freddie heard them, but they didn't feel real. They echoed, blurred, like they were coming from a tunnel far away. The idea of not going on stage was more disorienting than the collapse itself. Mary exchanged a terrified glance with the doctor. She could see Freddie's breathing grow uneven again. "Freddie," she said softly, sitting beside him on the sofa. "Please listen." But the door burst open before Freddie could respond. Brian May strode into the room first, his curls frizzy from humidity, his face drawn with worry and shock. Behind him came Roger Taylor, tense and pale, followed by John Deacon, quiet but visibly shaken. "Freddie, what happened?" Brian asked, crossing the room in long, urgent steps. Roger didn't speak. His eyes took in the scene: Freddie slumped on the sofa, Mary holding his hand, the doctor beside him, and the drummer's jaw clenched. John stayed near the door, gripping the handle like he needed it to stay grounded. Freddie straightened himself with effort. "It's nothing," he insisted. "Just took a bit of a tumble." "Don't make a fuss." "A tumble?" Roger snapped. "You collapsed. They said you were unconscious." Freddie attempted a smirk. "It barely appeared. And yet here I am. Very conscious. Very dramatic. Very me." But his voice was thin. His hands were trembling. Brian knelt in front of him, looking him straight in the eyes. "Freddie, are you all right? Really?" Freddie hated how gentle Brian's voice sounded. He hated the fear in their faces even more. They were used to fireworks, not fragility. "I'm fine," Freddie whispered. The doctor cut in firmly. "He is not fine. His vitals are unstable. This man needs rest, not a stadium." Roger's head snapped toward the doctor. "So? What do we do? Cancel?" The word hit Freddie like a knife. "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not." Brian blinked. "Freddie." "I said no," Freddie repeated, louder this time. "The crowd is here. The stage is ready. We're not canceling because I got a little lightheaded." The doctor frowned. "Mr. Mercury, this isn't lightheadedness. Your blood pressure is dangerously low. Your heart rhythm is irregular. Stress, dehydration, exhaustion, these things don't fix themselves." Freddie waved a hand dismissively. "Give me something. A vitamin shot. A bloody miracle. I'll be fine." Mary placed a hand over his. "Freddie. Stop." The simplicity of her voice, calm, steady, pleading, cut deeper than any medical warning. Roger paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "If we cancel, it'll be chaos. Press, refunds, the promoter." Brian interrupted him. "That doesn't matter. Freddie's health does." John finally stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. "Freddie, if you collapse again on stage, it'll be worse." Freddie closed his eyes. He knew they were right. He also knew he didn't care. The thought of canceling, of disappointing the fans, of appearing weak, of admitting even for a moment that something was wrong inside him, was unbearable. He opened his eyes again and looked at them one by one. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "The world doesn't get to see me weak. Ever. Not tonight. Not on that stage." Brian's eyes filled with grief. "Freddie, this isn't about weakness. It's about staying alive." Freddie flinched, visibly. The room froze. No one had said it that plainly before. Mary held his hand tighter. "Freddie," she whispered, "please, don't push yourself into a grave." He swallowed hard. His throat ached. His chest tightened. "I have to go on," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't understand, when I'm out there, I'm still me. The real me. The only me that feels alive." A silence settled over the room, thick, heavy, heartbreaking. Brian rested a hand gently on Freddie's knee. "Then tell us the truth. Are you scared?" Freddie's composure cracked. For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped completely. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm terrified." Mary closed her eyes. Roger exhaled sharply. John looked down at the floor. Brian's hand squeezed just a little tighter. The doctor stepped forward. "Mr. Mercury, with your permission, I'd like to run a quick test. Just to make sure you're stable enough to decide." Freddie hesitated. His pride screamed no. His body begged yes. Mary touched his face. "Freddie. Let him help you." After a long, trembling breath, Freddie finally nodded. "Fine," he whispered. "But hurry. My audience is waiting." The doctor closed the dressing room door behind him with a soft but definitive click. That sound alone was enough to change the atmosphere. Outside, the arena pulsed with noise, thousands of voices, distant chants, the low rumble of expectation. Inside, the room felt sealed off from the world, like a confession booth where no lies would survive. Freddie Mercury sat upright on the sofa, a towel draped loosely around his shoulders. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath slightly delayed, as if his body needed extra time to remember how to function. The doctor placed the stethoscope against Freddie's chest. "Deep breath," he said. Freddie tried. The air went in, but it didn't settle. It scraped its way down, leaving a tight pressure behind. His jaw clenched instinctively. Brian noticed it immediately. Brian stood closer than usual, his tall frame leaning in, curls falling forward as he watched Freddie's face with naked concern. Roger hovered nearby, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. John remained quieter, standing slightly back, but his eyes never left Freddie for a second. Mary sat beside him, holding his hand as if anchoring him to the sofa, to the room, to life itself. The doctor moved the stethoscope, listening longer than he should have. That silence was louder than any diagnosis. Finally, he pulled back. "Mr. Mercury," he said carefully, "your heart rhythm is irregular. Your blood pressure is low. Your reflex response is delayed." Roger exhaled sharply. "So what does that mean?" "It means," the doctor continued, "that whatever caused you to collapse hasn't passed." Freddie forced a smile. "You make it sound terribly dramatic." The doctor didn't return it. "If I had found you like this outside this venue," he said evenly, "I would have sent you straight to the hospital." The words landed like a physical blow. Mary's grip tightened around Freddie's hand. Brian closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them, fighting for composure. John swallowed hard. Roger was the first to speak. "Then he goes to the hospital. End of discussion." Freddie lifted his hand weakly. "No. Freddie. Not tonight," Freddie said, firmer now. "I'm not leaving tonight." The doctor frowned. "Mr. Mercury, this isn't negotiable. You're showing signs of systemic exhaustion. This isn't just stress." Freddie looked away. That alone told them everything. Mary leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Freddie, how long have you been feeling like this?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched, thick and painful. "Freddie," Brian said gently. "Please." Freddie closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded stripped of all performance. "Months," he admitted. "Maybe longer." Roger stared at him. "Months?" Freddie nodded once. "I kept telling myself it was touring. Travel. Late nights. Too much champagne and not enough sleep." "And you believe that?" Roger asked, incredulous. "I needed to," Freddie replied softly. Brian crouched in front of him, lowering himself until they were eye to eye. "Why didn't you tell us?" Freddie let out a hollow laugh. "And say what? That my body is betraying me? That some mornings I wake up already exhausted? That my voice scares me when I'm alone?" His eyes shimmered, but he refused to let the tears fall. I didn't want you to look at me like this, he continued. Like I'm fragile. Like I'm breakable. John finally stepped forward. Freddie, we already know you're human. Freddie shook his head slowly. No. You know Freddie Mercury. Not the man underneath when the lights go out. The doctor cleared his throat. Mr. Mercury, I need to be very honest with you. Your symptoms suggest something more serious than exhaustion. You need tests. Monitoring. Rest. No physical strain. Freddie stiffened. No stage. No microphone. No escape. If I stop, he said quietly, everything catches up with me. Mary's eyes filled with tears. What are you afraid of? Freddie hesitated, then whispered the truth he'd been running from. That if I stop, I won't be able to start again. The room fell completely still. Brian felt his chest tighten. Roger looked away. John pressed his lips together. For the first time, they understood. Freddie wasn't terrified of collapsing. He was terrified that this collapse meant the beginning of the end. Freddie's confession didn't sound dramatic. It didn't sound theatrical. It sounded true. That if I stop, I won't be able to start again. For a moment, nobody spoke. Not because they didn't have words, but because the words felt too small for what was happening. The arena outside throbbed with anticipation, a living storm pressing against the walls. The band could practically feel the crowd vibrating through the floor. Inside the dressing room, though, everything had turned quiet and sharp. Brian remained crouched in front of Freddie, his eyes fixed on Freddie's face like he was trying to memorize every detail, every flicker of fear, every tremble in his jaw. Roger stood a few paces away, arms crossed so tightly it looked like he was holding himself together. John kept his gaze low, shoulders tense, a man who wanted to speak but didn't trust his voice. Mary sat close beside Freddie, her hand still wrapped around his, her thumb rubbing slow circles into his knuckles as if she could smooth the panic out of his blood. The doctor broke the silence first. Mr. Mercury, he said firmly, you are not making a rational decision. You are exhausted, dehydrated, and your cardiac rhythm is unstable. Performing tonight could trigger a serious event. Freddie's head snapped toward him. His eyes had that familiar flash, the Queen frontman's glare, the one that could command stadiums and silence rooms. Then let it, Freddie said. The air froze. Mary's mouth parted in shock. Brian flinched as if someone had slapped him. Roger's jaw tightened in pure anger, not at Freddie, but at the cruelty of hearing him talk like that. John's eyes widened, then dropped again, like he couldn't bear it. Brian stood slowly, rising from his crouch, hands open in a pleading gesture. Freddie, don't say that. Freddie's breath was shallow, but his voice grew sharper, desperate. You want the truth, he snapped, and then immediately softened, as if the anger had burned him too. The truth is I can't stand the idea of them seeing me weak. Roger finally exploded, stepping forward. Stop it, he barked. Stop acting like this is about pride. You collapsed. You're not invincible. Freddie looked at him with a cracked half-smile. That's exactly the problem, darling. The world thinks I am. Roger's eyes glistened with fury and grief. Then let the world be wrong. Freddie shook his head. You don't understand. Brian took a step closer. Then help us understand. Freddie stared at them for a long beat, and something in his face began to crumble, the strict lines of control loosening into bare fear. Because the stage is the only place I still feel like myself, he whispered. The words didn't come with drama. They came like surrender. Brian's expression changed, softened, shattered. Freddie continued, voice trembling. Off stage, everything feels wrong. My body, my head, the silence, the waiting. But out there, he gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the arena, toward the roar. Out there I'm still Freddie Mercury. Not, whatever this is turning me into. Mary's grip tightened. Freddie. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet now. I don't want to disappear in front of you. Mary's face broke. You're not disappearing. But I feel it, Freddie whispered. I feel something slipping. And the only time it stops is when the lights hit me. The doctor stepped forward again, voice stern. Mr. Mercury, that is not a reason to endanger your life. Freddie's eyes flashed. Then what am I supposed to do? Lie here and let fear swallow me whole? Roger pointed toward the sofa. Yes. If it keeps you breathing. Freddie's mouth tightened, and the tears finally came, small, stubborn tears he tried to blink away, like they offended him. I hate this, he whispered. Brian put a hand on Freddie's shoulder, gentle, steady. I know. Freddie shook his head, almost violently. No, you don't. You don't know what it feels like to be adored by millions and still feel like you're one bad night away from being nothing. John's voice finally emerged, quiet but clear. You're not nothing, he said. You're Freddie. You're our friend. Freddie turned toward him, startled, as if he'd forgotten John could cut through the noise with just one sentence. John stepped closer. We're not canceling because we think you're weak. We're considering canceling because we love you. Freddie's shoulders trembled. Roger's anger collapsed into something softer, more helpless. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Freddie looked down. His voice was barely audible. Because I didn't want you to look at me the way you are right now. Brian's eyes filled. We're looking at you like brothers who are terrified of losing you. That sentence struck Freddie harder than any medical warning. He inhaled sharply, face tightening, as if he were fighting a sob. Then he whispered, in a voice so small it sounded like the boy he used to be before the stage made him loud. Please, don't take this from me. Silence. Roger's eyes squeezed shut. John stared at the floor. Brian's hand stayed on Freddie's shoulder, steady but trembling. Mary leaned in close, her forehead almost touching Freddie's temple. Freddie, she whispered, what are you asking? Freddie swallowed hard. His throat worked like the words were physically painful. I'm asking for one thing, he said. Let me go out there. Let me sing. Even if it's just tonight. The doctor began to protest, but Brian lifted a hand, stopping him. Brian looked at Roger and John. They exchanged a long, heavy glance, years of loyalty compressed into a single silent conversation. Then Brian turned back to Freddie. If we do this, Brian said quietly, you don't do it alone. Roger nodded once. We watch you every second. John's voice was soft but unshakable. And the moment you can't, we stop. Freddie's eyes filled again. He nodded, breathing shaking. Mary kissed his forehead. Okay, she whispered, broken. Okay. And just like that, the decision wasn't about the show anymore. It was about giving Freddie Mercury one last moment of control, while the people who loved him stood ready to catch him if he fell. They moved toward the stage slowly, like a fragile procession. Freddie walked between Brian and Roger, their presence subtle but deliberate, close enough to catch him if his body betrayed him again. John followed a step behind, silent, alert. Mary stayed near the side, her eyes never leaving Freddie's back, as if sheer attention could keep him standing. The hallway felt longer than usual. Every step Freddie took required intention. His legs obeyed, but reluctantly. His chest felt tight, his breathing shallow, not panicked, but cautious, like his body no longer trusted itself. When they reached the stage entrance, Freddie stopped. The arena was empty, but not quiet. The vastness hummed with expectation, with echoes of past nights when his voice had filled every corner without effort. Now, the emptiness felt confrontational. Brian noticed Freddie hesitate. Take your time, he said gently. Freddie nodded, then stepped forward. The lights were dimmed to rehearsal mode, soft amber and blue tones casting long shadows across the stage. Freddie walked to the center microphone, his place, and wrapped his fingers around it as if grounding himself. Roger settled behind the drum kit, rolling his shoulders nervously. John adjusted his bass strap, avoiding eye contact. Brian lifted the red special, but his fingers hovered, waiting. Freddie closed his eyes. "Let's try something light first," Brian suggested. "Just to warm up." Freddie shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I need to know the truth." He opened his eyes. "Somebody to love." The words landed heavy. Roger froze. "Freddie, that's—" "I know what it is," Freddie cut in softly. "If I can't sing that, then I need to face it." Brian hesitated, then nodded. "All right," he said. "Your call." The count-in was gentle. Brian played the opening chords, slower than usual. Roger followed with restraint. John's bass filled the space cautiously, like it was afraid to press too hard. Freddie lifted the microphone. The first line came out quieter than anyone expected. Not wrong. Not off-key. Just, fragile. Freddie's brow furrowed. He tried again, pushing slightly harder. The note wavered. A sharp flicker of panic crossed his face, gone almost instantly, but not missed. Mary's hand flew to her mouth. Freddie inhaled deeply and forced the next line. This time, his voice cracked. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough. Roger stopped playing. Brian's fingers froze mid-chord. John looked down. Freddie stood very still. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence pressed against him harder than any crowd ever had. "I just need to warm up," Freddie said quickly, almost defensively. "It's fine." He took another breath and tried again. The note came out strained, thinner now, like a muscle that had already been overworked. Freddie's hand tightened around the microphone. His chest tightened too. Suddenly, the room tilted, not violently, but enough to make his knees soften. He took a step back, misjudged the distance, and Brian was there instantly, steadying him. "Freddie," Brian said, firm now. "Stop." "I'm fine," Freddie insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I just—" A sharp pain sliced through his chest. Freddie gasped, instinctively clutching the microphone stand. Mary rushed onto the stage. "Freddie." Roger jumped up from the kit. "That's it. Enough." Freddie shook his head, breathing fast, uneven. "Don't stop. Please. If I stop now." Brian grabbed his shoulders gently but firmly. "Listen to me. This isn't about pride. This is your body screaming." Freddie looked at him, eyes glassy. "If I stop," Freddie whispered, "they'll know. The audience. The press. Everyone." Mary took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "They don't matter," she said, her voice breaking. "You do." Freddie stared at her, tears spilling freely now, unfiltered, unapologetic. "I don't know who I am without this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be anything else." The band closed in around him instinctively. Brian stood at his side. Roger behind him, one hand hovering near his back. John stepped closer, quiet but present. Freddie's breathing slowed, but his hands trembled. "I just wanted one night where it still worked," he whispered. Brian swallowed hard. "We'll decide together," he said. "Not like this." Freddie wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his own tears. "Just one more," he pleaded. "One song. If I can't do it, I'll stop. I promise." The band exchanged looks. Roger shook his head slightly, conflicted. John's jaw tightened. Brian closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "All right," Brian said softly. 1. Freddie nodded, relief and fear colliding inside his chest. Because this wasn't rehearsal anymore. It was a test. And deep down, Freddie already suspected he might not like the answer. Freddie stood alone at the center of the stage. Not as a performer. Not yet. Just as a man holding a microphone that suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. The arena beyond the curtains roared with life, thousands of voices chanting his name, unaware of how close they were to never hearing it that night. The sound vibrated through the floor, through Freddie's shoes, through his bones. Brian stood a few steps behind him, guitar strapped on but untouched. Roger hovered near the drums, unusually still. John held his bass low, fingers resting but not playing. Mary remained at the side of the stage, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes locked on Freddie like she was afraid to blink. Freddie inhaled slowly. His lungs protested. He felt the tightness again, not sharp, but persistent. A reminder. A warning. For a split second, he imagined what it would feel like to turn around and walk away. To let someone else step forward and explain. To rest. To disappear quietly into the safety of darkness. The thought terrified him more than the pain. He turned back toward the band. "I can't promise anything," he said softly. "I don't even know if my voice will hold." Brian stepped closer. "You don't have to promise anything." Roger nodded. "We'll carry you if we have to." John added quietly, "We're not here for perfection." Freddie swallowed. Then he nodded once. "Okay," he whispered. Brian gave the signal. The lights rose slowly, not the explosive blast of a full show, but a cautious glow, as if the stage itself was unsure what would happen next. The curtain lifted just enough for Freddie to see the front rows of the audience, faces blurred into a sea of expectation. Freddie raised the microphone. The first note came out. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't clean. But it was there. A fragile thread of sound stretched across the arena. Freddie closed his eyes, leaning into it, letting instinct guide him where strength could not. His voice wavered, but it carried something deeper than volume: honesty. Vulnerability. Truth. Brian played gently, adjusting to Freddie's breath rather than the other way around. Roger softened his tempo, watching Freddie's shoulders rise and fall. John anchored the sound with restraint, grounding the moment. Freddie felt the crowd lean in. They knew something was different. The second verse cost him more effort. His throat burned. His chest felt tight. Sweat gathered at his hairline, his hands trembling slightly around the microphone. Halfway through the song, he faltered. Just for a heartbeat. Mary's breath caught. Roger tensed. Brian's fingers froze for a fraction of a second. John held his breath. Freddie steadied himself. He didn't push. He didn't force. He let the note go softer instead of stronger, and in doing so, something remarkable happened. The audience grew quieter. They weren't watching a legend anymore. They were witnessing a human being fighting to stay present. When the song ended, there was a pause. Not confusion. Reverence. Then applause rose, not explosive, not wild, but deep, sincere, overwhelming in its tenderness. Freddie lowered the microphone, breathing hard. His knees felt weak. His vision blurred slightly. Brian was at his side instantly. "That's enough." Freddie nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't resist. The fight had drained out of him. As the band gently guided him back toward the shadows, the crowd continued to applaud, unaware that they were witnessing something they would never see again, not this version of Freddie, not this raw. Once behind the curtain, Freddie's strength gave out completely. He leaned into Brian, who wrapped an arm around him. Roger supported him from the other side. John stood close, ready. Mary reached him and cupped his face. You did it, she whispered. Freddie exhaled shakily. Did I? Yes, she said, tears streaming freely now. You were brave. Freddie closed his eyes. I don't think I can keep going, he admitted quietly. No one argued. Brian spoke first. Then we stop. Roger nodded. No debate. John placed a hand on Freddie's back. This doesn't end you. Freddie let the words sink in. The doctor stepped forward again, but this time Freddie didn't flinch. Take me, Freddie said softly. I'm ready to rest. They helped him sit. The noise of the arena faded behind the walls, replaced by something smaller. More intimate. Safer. Freddie leaned back, exhausted beyond words. For the first time that night, maybe for the first time in months, he allowed himself to stop performing. And in that quiet backstage space, surrounded by the people who loved him most, Freddie Mercury wasn't a star fighting collapse. He was simply a man who had given everything he had left. And for once, that was enough.